Welcome back to Face the Nation and some political analysis on a very busy week in Washington. Julie Pace is the Washington bureau chief for the Associated Press. David Nakamura covers the White House for the Washington Post. We're also joined by Washington Post columnist and deputy editorial page editor Ruth Marcus and the founder and publisher of The Federalist, Ben Domenech. Julie, I want to start with you. Put the Mueller news or not news into context.
Well, there's nothing like a good Washington drama to start off your week. We're at a point where there is much more that we don't know about what's going to be happening potentially on Monday with Mueller and indictments than what we do know. We don't know what charges will be brought forward, who they may be focused on. But I think what we can say pretty definitively at this point is that the Mueller investigation is not winding down, which is what the White House wants people to think right now. They want people to believe that this is an investigation that has largely run its course, that there is no evidence of collusion, and therefore nothing to see there. Mueller, though, is taking kind of the opposite approach. He is very methodically working through White House officials, other people who have been close to the president, doing interviews. And I think it's important for people to remember also that when you do end up with these special counsel investigations and the first set of charges start coming through, you tend to start at the bottom. You tend to start with the low-hanging fruit. So I don't think anybody should expect that if we do see indictments this week, that it will be the last or the final announcement from the special counsel.
David, what have you made of the White House reaction to this? There seemed also to a kind of a pre-reaction in the week in terms of White House focus on Democrats. And then the president is speaking a little bit about this on Twitter this morning.
Yes, he is. I mean, nothing animates this president more than lashing out about this Russia investigation and trying to throw the blame back onto his political opponents, including Hillary Clinton. We've seen that again this morning, talking about, which I think we'll talk about in a minute, this dossier and the Democratic funding of it. And, you know, once again, it just comes down, now we're 9 months in to this process since he's been president, where the president still does not talk about fundamentally how Russia has potentially affected the democracy. And ultimately, that continues to get lost in this as this investigation goes forward about exactly what Russia did in this election. And the president has not talked to George Bush himself came out the other day with his speech talking about what a danger this is to our democracy and Russian meddling. But we still haven't heard that from this president, who continues to say the victim here is Trump.
Ruth, the victim is Trump. The president talked this morning about, you know, during the Clinton years, the independent counsel Ken Starr the Clinton team went after him. Do you expect that here? Does it work? Is that a trap? What's your sense of how this reaction to whatever news we get next week will play out?
There doesn't seem to be any reluctance on the part of not necessarily the White House, but certainly its allies, to start going after Bob Mueller. We saw it this week, the Wall Street Journal, he should resign. I have to say, all of this, the dossier, the uranium, the attack on Mueller seems to me to be a just absolutely frantic effort to distract attention from what we do know, which is as David really importantly pointed out, the intelligence community concluded that Russia tried to meddle in the election. It concluded that Russia tried to meddle in the election on Donald Trump's behalf. So and Donald Trump has never acknowledged that. He's constantly called it a hoax. A responsible president would want to get to the bottom of this. And that is not what we're seeing.
And Ben, it is possible that there could be both a special counsel inquiry that is legitimate, and there could be these other questions that the White House has been raising this week. One of them, the fact that this dossier of information about the president, a lot of it unconfirmed, a lot of it very unconfirmed, if that's a category, that it was funded in part by the DNC and the Clinton campaign.
Well, we certainly know that the Clinton campaign and the DNC did pay for access to this dossier. How much of the dossier's creation they paid for, we have less of a clear picture of, in part because of this deal that was cut on behalf of Fusion GPS with the House Intel Committee.
The authors of the
dossier in this instance. I think that dossier is concerning in part because the FBI was willing to engage with the creator of it and potentially was on path toward paying for it. And that also potentially this dossier was used as the justification to look into other people in Donald Trump's circle. I think we need clarification on this going forward. But as Ruth indicated, in so many different ways, this is one of those areas where everything really remains very muddy at the current stance.
Well, let's move from muddy to slightly opaque. Julie, this week you had two Republicans speak out very strongly. about the president. But, well, I'll phrase it as a question. Was that two senators on their way out to retirement, or was it the start of something different than just kind of criticism of this president?
Well, there's the public dynamic and then the private dynamic. Privately, what Corker and what Flake were reflecting was what their colleagues say. They are reflecting a mood among a lot of Republican senators where they feel like they would like this president to succeed on policy, but they really feel like he has put certain elements of our democracy at risk. I have senators that say things that are just astounding to me about a president from their own party. Publicly, however, it's a much different story. Flake essentially issued a call to arms from his colleagues and no one lined up behind to follow him. And it's because they look at their own electoral prospects, and Donald Trump is very popular among Republican voters.
This is the problem that they run into, because the Republican senators, many of them would like to have a different constituency than the one they actually have. But you cannot dissolve the people and elect another. Instead, you face a situation where the fact is that Jeff Flake gave an interview right after he gave his speech, where he said, you know, when I came here, I wanted to talk about limited government and free trade and things like that. Well, that's fine. But he also said, I didn't want to talk about divisive issues like these culture war issues that we're talking about. Well, the electorate wants you to talk about those issues. And one of the reasons that Donald Trump has succeeded to the degree that he did in changing the Republican Party into one that is the party of Trump is because he just wraps his arms around all of these issues. Flake described those culture war battles as the politics of resentment and grievance. But the fact is that the majority of Republican voters across the country do not believe that saying something like NFL players should respect the flag and stand for it is an act of grievance or resentment. They view it as simple patriotism, and that's the reason that Trump has prevailed and that people like Flake are on the way out.
You know, what was remarkable about the Flake and Corker comments wasn't simply that they made it about a president of their own party. It's hard to even remember senators of opposite parties speaking in that kind of language about a president. But as Julie said, the silence that succeeded it. And the silence is telling on two grounds. First, that almost all of them do privately agree with that assessment, more or less. And also that they are scared and reluctant to say it. That is, Jeff Flake was leading no one to follow him. But watch two things. Watch what happens with Mueller and see how that affects things. But even more, watch what happens with tax cuts. Because what you hear from senators when you say, and why is there silence, is, but he was elected, which is a totally legitimate point, but tax cuts. If they're unable to get these tax cuts done, I think that really shatters the cohesion of the party. To the extent there is cohesion.
We're going to pick that up. We're going to just take a quick break now. We'll be back with more from our panel. We'll talk about this a little more, and then tax cuts as well.